Billing is arguably one of the most important things you do for your business, making sure money is coming into your account every single month based on phases being completed or based on projects being completed. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through how I would manage billing for my phases or my projects within Monday.com. By the way, if you'd like us to help you set up Monday.com for your business, check out the link below. We would love to help. As you can see here, I'm inside of our example Monday.com system. Now, this system has been built already to manage projects and phases, and then obviously tasks associated with those phases. If you are not familiar with this setup, I'm going to point you in the direction of another video on my channel explaining how to manage projects within Monday.com or how to manage phases within projects within Monday.com. It walks you through the entire setup. But today I want to focus on billing. So my use case for this is at the completion of every phase, and there are multiple phases within a particular project, I want to automatically bill for that phase. That's the assumption that we're working on here. So what I mean by that is when the status of phase 1 is changed to completed, it automatically creates a new billing note against that particular phase. And then I would also want to be able to see how much has been billed for this particular project. So then I can see we've got X amount remaining, and then I can start looking at things like cash flow, etc., etc. This isn't overly complicated, provided you have this setup already done. If you don't, you're going to have to go watch some other videos. Unfortunately, I can't do everything in one video. So how are we going to go ahead and do this? The first thing that we're going to want to go ahead and do is create a new board, and we can call this invoicing if you want to. You can call it billing, you can call it whatever you like, and then you can select your privacy options. So main, private, or shareable if you want to share this externally. And then we just want to define what we're managing. This is just a terminology thing, but I'm just going to put in invoices. Okay, so the idea being that when a phase is completed, it automatically creates a new invoice for that particular phase. Then we can look at how do we push that information over from our Monday.com system over to our QuickBooks, our Xero, our free agent, if you use stuff like that, or if you're a big company like your SAP, your SAP, whatever, but you want to push that, be pushing that data across. So this is going to be our invoicing space. We've created our new board where all of the invoices are going to be managed. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to create our different groups. So these are the groupings for our invoice. So we're going to have new invoices, I guess. And then we would have awaiting payment, or that could be the same thing. And then we might, then what I would strongly recommend doing is we have overdue 30 days invoice. Then we'd have invoices, overdue 30 days invoices. Yeah, that makes sense. Invoices. Then we would have overdue 60 days invoices, 60 days invoices. And then we would probably have an escalated group if you want to. Escalated invoices. There we go. Obviously, that is for people that have gone past the 60-day mark, and then you can escalate it. Again, this is where we can start automatically assigning people that are responsible for that invoice when it goes past the 60-day mark. So it might notify the account manager for that particular phase to say that they haven't paid. They can then get in touch and talk with them. It might go to the managing director. It might go to someone that's very scary. It might even go to debt collectors. That we don't want, obviously, but you get the idea, right? So we've got new invoices. So these are invoices that have just been prepared. You could argue that new invoices and awaiting payment are the same thing. I'm going to come on to why there might be some nuance there. And then we have paid invoices. Cool. So I'm just going to change the colorings. So we've got green for paid, escalated is going to be in red, overdue 60 days is going to be yellow, overdue 30 days is going to be, I don't know, struggling for colors, yellow, there we go, sure, yellow, orange, red, green, and then new invoices is going to be in the gray. So then we just want to set the status option to match that. So status new. And then we'd have awaiting payment. We would have overdue 30 days overdue. By the way, just leave the green one always for paid. Okay. So we'd have 30 overdue. So 30 days overdue. There we go. 60 days overdue. Days overdue. And then we would have, let's say, escalated. And then we would have, obviously we've already got the paid, so we can just reposition these accordingly. And then I, with my, I just have to make sure that they all match. So we went orange there, and the colors, by the way, obviously. And then awaiting payment was in the purple. Cool. So we got new. We don't need that one. We can get rid of that. I might change that to match the actual red. There we go. So new, awaiting payment, 30 days, 60 days, escalated, and then paid. Cool. So we can hide the column summary on here. What I would do now is I would go to automate, top right hand corner, and then we want to manage and create new automations. And these automations are essentially for when the status changes to new, move item to group new. This is the boring stuff, but it's just quite important. Saves us an enormous amount of time. We'll come on to why these are important as well to have these automations set up. So new and then awaiting payment. I've got to make a decision on what we're doing with that awaiting payment thing. Create automation when status changes to 30 days overdue, move item to group 30 days overdue, 30-day invoices, shall we say. I mean, 30 days is quite common. Obviously, this is 30 days from the billing terms, which might be 30 days, might be 60 days, might be 90 days. So that's from, so let's say the invoice gets sent out, they've got 60 days to pay it. On the 61st day, they're then going to 30 days overdue. I think that makes sense, yeah. But again, you can kind of adjust this however you like. You can make it make sense for you. But just to give you an idea, so move item to group escalated. There we go. And then we would have create automation, one final one, status changes to paid, move item to group paid. So now the idea is that when the status changes, it moves to the representative or the representing group. So let's just test that now. That's awaiting payment. That could be marked as paid. And then this one could be marked as escalated. So you can see how they move across automatically. So the next thing that we're going to want to look at is the date created. So that, again, this is just standard stuff. So date created, we want to track when this invoice was created. So I would then restrict the column editing on here. And then we also want to add another date column. So that was just a standard date column. And this would be date paid. Okay. So then this is quite helpful. So I can restrict the column editing, and then I would add another formula column. And this formula column would be for the time difference between the day of the invoice being created to the day in which it was paid. And I would just say, give me the difference in days between date created and date paid. This will allow us to get an average amount of time that it takes for someone to pay an invoice. You can then look at that on a client basis. You can then look at that on a project basis. You can then look at that however you like, but then you can actually start forecasting your cash. So you can see on average, it takes 27 days for a customer to pay our invoices. If I then know that, I can be much more sensible with our cash flow, our forecasting, and everything else. So we've got date created, we've got date paid. We need to just set up some automations. So again, automate top right-hand corner. The first automation we want is when an item is created, we want to set the date, and that's the date created date to today. So we're just telling Monday.com that when a new item is added to our invoicing board, we want to set that date created column to today. We then want to update our when status changes to paid, move item to group paid invoices, and also add another step in this automation that says and set the date paid to today. And I'll show you why that is important. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new invoice, hit enter, and then you can see the date created automatically populates. Now I'm just going to assume that we did this in the past, and then I'm going to change the status to date or paid. So new invoice is now marked as paid. That's going to automatically set the date paid to today. I can see that it's taken 5 days for this invoice to be paid. So this is our invoicing process. Now the next thing that we're going to obviously want to look at is connecting our phases to our invoicing. So, and what I'm actually going to do here is just I'm going to create a separate folder, and I'm just going to call this finance. So this is obviously our project management. Project management inevitably ties in with our finance, but it's just separated. So what we want to do is create a connection column, connect boards, and we want to connect our invoicing to our phases. So we press connect boards, select boards, and then we want to select our phases board, create a two-way connection. This is quite important that we create the two-way connection here. So now I can see which phase this particular invoice is associated with. So you can see if I go to my phases board, I've got a few different phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then I can go ahead and connect this. Now, if you're not using phases, you're just using a project, as opposed to connecting to your phase, you would just connect to your project instead. So then you would raise invoices. Now, if you are doing billing cycles or within a project, you are doing multiple invoices, I would recommend doing phases anyway. In fact, as a business mechanism generally, I would always suggest, this is from my knowledge, by the way, I'm no expert, but I would suggest tying invoicing to completion of phases or milestones. So that means it's easy for you to tick off at that particular stage that everything has been done, and then you can manage the phases within your project management system easier, and you know when the cash is due based on the phase and when it's completed, etc., etc. Hopefully that makes sense. So now I can see that this is associated with phase 1. What I can also do is add a mirror column. So press the plus button on the right hand side here. I can mirror over the project name from the phase. So I can press phase as a mirror option, then just mirror over the project. So I can see that this is for this particular project. Now, if you had, let's say, a clients board and clients were connected to projects, you would be able to mirror over that information as well. So it's getting even more helpful. You'd be able to see the client information. That would be especially useful if your client had invoicing details on it. So if you had another board that's your client's board, the client was connected to the project, but you also had the invoicing details of the client stored on the client's board, you can mirror that over to the invoice. That would obviously help with the integration with your QuickBooks, your Xero, your Free Agent, your SAP, whatever you ever happen to be using. So new invoices, awaiting payment invoices, overdue 30 days, overdue 60 days, escalated invoices, and then paid invoices. So we've got add another column, date column here, and this is going to be our payment due date. Okay, so payment, I'm just going to call this due date. Now we're going to assume that every single invoice that gets created is due 30 days. So your payment terms are standard of 30 days. Now, in order to set that up, what we want to go do is automate top right hand corner, create automation. And then we just want to say when an item is created, then we set date. So this is very similar to the date created column, set date, due date to today, and then push date. So next step is to push the due date by, and then in this instance, it's going to be 30 days. Okay. So we're just saying due date is 30 days. So now every time a new invoice is created, it knows that it's 30 days due until it is due. Just hit enter. So new invoices, due date's going to automatically populate 6th of August plus 30 days, 5th of September. So that's when I know that this particular invoice is due for payment. Now, obviously, we then want to work through overdue 30 days, overdue 60 days. So what we'd probably say is when date arrives, let's think about this actually. Go to automate. What's going to be the best way? When date arrives, yes, when date arrives, and then the date column being the due date, and then the day it arrives at, let's say 7 in the morning, and only if status is not equal to paid, yeah, then not equal to paid, then move item to group, and then we move item to group, or actually we don't want to move the item to the group, we want to change status, and then the status change will move it to the group automatically. So we change the status to 30 days overdue. Okay, so when due date arrives and only if status is not paid, it's going to change and set the status to 30 days overdue. One other thing you can do is use this as a due date and set it as a deadline. And you don't actually necessarily need to associate a person with this, but we can just connect the column. So that means that if it looks like this, we can see that there's a red mark and it will say the number of days that it's overdue. So 30 days, when date arrives and only if status is not paid, change it to overdue 30 days. Now, what we want to say is automate top right hand corner, when due date arrives and only if status is not paid, 30 days overdue. And then we want to create another automation, date arrives. And then we want to say, when due date arrives, 30 days after due date arrives at 7 in the morning, and only if the status is not equal to paid, status is not paid, then we change to paid, then we change the status, and the status being the status column to 60 days overdue. So now we're saying that if it gets 60 days down, so when due date arrives, it knows that it's 30 days overdue or is overdue a certain amount of time. Or yeah, I think that makes sense. Or you could just have overdue. And then you've got 30 days overdue, 30 days after due date. Yes, so the due date comes 30 days from the invoice being created. 30 days after that, it is then 60 days overdue, and that will be here. And then you could have escalated invoices as well. So you could have another logic that says 60 days overdue. So what I'll just do is I will duplicate this to save some time. So we say 60 days overdue. overdue and status is not equal to paid, set status to, and then escalated, and then create automation. Okay, so now what we can start doing as well is when status changes to, let's say, escalated. So when status changes to escalated, and in fact we can just use the existing when status changes on here. So when status changes to escalated, move item to group escalated, and then assign person, and let's say in this instance I want to assign myself as the person responsible for this, because I need to look into this as the owner of the business. And I can also send out a notification, notify, and I can notify someone internally. You could also notify people externally as well if you wanted to, whether your invoicing system is already doing that or not. But you can create some automated emails. So if you go to this 30 days overdue due date, and then you can say send email, Gmail, for example, I think is what we're looking for. You can send an email directly from your monday.com system to say, hey, just by the way, you've not paid your bill yet, which is never fun. So you can automate that stuff as you so wish. Now, what I would inevitably look to do here is I would want to integrate with my accountancy software. So in order to do that, I would need an invoice. I would need a text column, and this text column is going to be an invoice UUID. Now, what does that mean? An invoice UUID is the unique reference number that is generated by your accountancy software when a new invoice is created. I think I said that twice. What would happen is we would run an automation or an integration via Zapier that when a new invoice record is created on your invoice board within monday.com, it's automatically going to create a new invoice within your Xero system. And then when that invoice is created, it's then going to push the invoice UUID back over to monday.com. And then we're going to create another integration that says when the status of the invoice changes inside of your QuickBooks system or your Xero system, we're going to find the invoice record using the invoice UUID and update the status. So that means that your invoicing board and your QuickBooks are directly synced with one another. So your team don't necessarily or would not need any access to QuickBooks to see the status of an invoice. It'd be very easy to do just looking at your invoices board, as you can see here. I'm not going to cover the integration in this video. It's extremely complex, or it is a lot more complex. If you'd like us to help you with something like this, check out the link below. We are more than happy to help. But this obviously is a bit of a game changer. Now, obviously with an invoice, there's numerical values that are associated with it. At the phase level, we've defined our revenue, we've defined our cost, and we've defined our profit. Now, on our invoicing, all we actually need to push over is our revenue. So we're going to have a new numbers column, numbers, and then this is going to be our revenue. And then that would be a dollars, or yeah, let's just say dollars. And then we can hide the column summary. And then what we can also do, which is quite important, is a formula. So I'm going to work on the assumption that the revenue column within the phases is exclusive of any tax. So if you're in the UK and you're working with another UK business, you would need to charge VAT. If you are working in the US, I know there's sales tax as well. So this would be revenue including tax. Okay. So what we would do is give me revenue plus 20%. And hit enter into the AI assistant for your formula. Hopefully that will work. So there we go, revenue times 1.2. Again, it's not an overly complicated sum. So if I put 10,000, it's going to be 12,000. If I just click into this, I can set the currency and then I can hide the column summary. This is obviously going to be quite important. Well, actually might not be that important. The other option you could have is a status option that defines whether there's tax associated. So tax, and you could have a yes or no label, so no, and then if you wanted in green you could have a yes, and then you could say in the formula only if the tax status is equal to yes, then add the revenue. You also might have different percentages as well. I know that's more common in the US, so you might have a 10% with one state, you might have a different tax rate with another state, so that becomes a bit more complicated, but that's stuff you can consider, and you can just write into the AI assistant, give me the revenue including tax only where the tax, or add 20% only where the tax is equal to yes, otherwise do not, or based on the different variables. So if it's 10%, add 10%. You just need to tell the AI assistant this. So hopefully this is making sense so far. the next thing that we're going to ultimately want to look at is the invoice being created automatically when the status of a phase is marked as completed. So if we go to our phase here, you can see we've got our different status options: active, completed, upcoming, cancel, / postponed. What we can do is go to automate in the top right hand corner here and go create automation. And then we just say when status changes to completed, then create item in board and connect boards. Now, when we created that connection column from the invoices board, what we also did was we press create a two-way connection. So that means it's visible on the phases board as well. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. But we're going to create on the invoices board. Oh dear, where is this board? Why am I not able to find it? Invoicing, that's why. And then we go boards and then phases with link to invoicing. We can change the name of that. And then the data from our phase is going to push over to our invoice. So you might have the name of the phase, and then you might have dash, and then you could add something else. So let's say the phase type, whatever. But the revenue is going to match. The status doesn't need to match. I mean, you could assign the person, or the person could be, you could have a separate person column on the invoices. That's the account manager. You could also mirror that over. You might define the tax status here, and we can get rid of everything else. So I'm just going to keep this simple for the time being, but essentially what we're looking for is when the status is changed to completed on the phases board, it's going to automatically create a new record on our invoices board, which it has done there. Pull the revenue across. We've got revenue including tax, and then the due date's automatically been set up. And then it's also automatically associated with both the project and also the phase, which is really helpful. Now, like I spoke about earlier, if you also had the customer, you could pull the customer details across. The question is, when you're generating the invoices within Xero, we are going to need some customer details. So we do need somewhere to get that from. That's a separate video, but you would have to obviously connect all of that as well. So there's additional stuff to do. What you can do is also have an item ID, which is a unique reference number internally for that particular invoice. Item IDs within Monday.com have got relatively good with regards to customization. As you can see here, it's giving me all of this nonsense. You can create a custom key. You can just set this up as you want. There are also other applications available within Monday.com's app marketplace to make unique IDs for new records. You can also do it via Zapier. That's actually my preferred method. But yeah, you've got a few different options there. As you can see here, we've got the phase 1, and then we would say dash, and then maybe the unique ID. You can update the name, get sophisticated. But again, hopefully this is just giving you the basics. So now what we want to do is we want to track the amount paid. So if I go to my phases here, I can see the invoice associated with this particular phase. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to restrict the column editing. I can see that there's 2 associated here. I'm going to untick item false. I think we used that as a previous example. And then what we want to do is only mirror over the amount that's been paid, or actually we want to mirror over both the amount paid and the amount outstanding, because then we can roll that up to the project. So what I mean by that is how much in revenue for this particular phase is outstanding and how much has been paid. So what we're going to do is we'll add 2 formula columns here, and this formula column is going to say show me or give me the revenue only when the status is equal to paid, and then hit enter. So now this is only going to show me the revenue. So it's if status is equal to paid revenue. So just give me the revenue. So you can see here now that if the revenue is 10,000, and because the status is equal to paid, it gives me the value of 10,000. So that's telling me that this is being paid. Okay. And this is, I'll show you why this is important in a moment. But as you can see here, there's a value in both of these. You've got revenue including tax, but the status is equal to new, so it's not giving me a paid value. And I'll just change this to paid value, hit enter. Now, if I then change the status to paid, it's going to automatically update. This is very helpful. So what we then want to do, and I'm just going to restrict the column editing on here so people can't mess with the formula. I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but only where the status is equal to not paid. So give me the value only where the status is not equal, not not equal to paid. I had a mind blank here. And then give me the value. What I meant to say is revenue. Only where the status is not equal to paid. So it's literally the reverse of the other one, right? So press paid and then set formula. So now you can see that this is equal to revenue, status new. It's giving me the value of unpaid value of 10,000, right? Hopefully this is making sense because I'm kind of confusing myself. And then we can restrict the column editing. I'm going to show you why this is important, okay? So we've got paid value, unpaid value. We might not even necessarily need the paid value, but where the status is equal to paid, it will give us our paid value on the right hand side here. So now we can go to our phase and we can mirror across that information. So I can go ahead and add a column to the right, just press the plus button, mirror over from the invoicing board, and we'll go to invoices, the paid value. So how much for this phase has been paid? As you can see, nothing has been paid at the moment for this particular phase. That means that we've got an outstanding balance, which we can work out using another formula column. So we go formula, outstanding balance, or just call it balance of revenue. If we go to our AI assistant, revenue minus paid value. Okay. So now I can see my outstanding balance. I would argue now that we don't actually need this unpaid value. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this because I mean it's kind of a bit backwards what I'm trying to get at. So we've got outstanding balance per phase, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the $sign here and then hide the column summary, and then I'll probably also restrict the column editing. So I've got my revenue, I've got the invoice that's associated with it, I've then got the paid value, and then I have the outstanding balance. Now, if I go to my invoicing and I can see that this is now equal to paid, and I can go back to my phase, the outstanding balance is equal to 0. This is then very important on a project level because what we can do, I'm just going to delete this here, is we can add another mirror column and we can mirror up from our phases the outstanding balance for all of our phases associated with that particular project. So I've got my revenue, I've got my cost, I would have my project profit automatically populating, and then also I have my outstanding balance. Now I can see how much money is left to be paid for this particular project. If I now go back to my invoicing and I associate these other two, so let's say what should we do actually? If we go to phases, this is actually quite an easy thing to do. So we've got 3 phases here. So I'm just going to change that to completed, and I'm going to change that to completed. That's going to automatically populate our additional, so our phase 2 and our phase 3 automatically connect as well. You can see that the revenue 80 and 150,000. If I then go to my phases, I can see that there's an outstanding balance of 80 and 150,000 for these 2 phases. However, this one has been paid. And then we can go to our projects here. I can see that this outstanding balance is still 230,000. However, if I then go ahead to my invoice and mark phase 2 as having been paid, this would then update on my phase naturally, right? To 0. As you can see, the outstanding balance on here is 0. And then we can go to my project and I can see the outstanding balance for this entire project is 150,000. Hopefully you get the idea though. So, and then that would, in an ideal world, that would automatically create a new invoice in your QuickBooks system. When that's paid, it would update inside of monday.com. That would then update on the phase level and then ultimately update on the project level. You'd be able to see the outstanding invoice balance for all of your projects. There we go. Appreciate this video was extremely comprehensive. I didn't really think I realized how much down the rabbit hole we were going to go, or how far down the rabbit hole we were going to go. Hopefully this video has been helpful. There is an enormous amount more to this, as I'm sure you can imagine, especially when you get into invoicing. But this is how I would think about at least managing billing cycles within monday.com and integrating with my QuickBooks or my Xero or my free agent or whatever system you might be using. If you have questions, feel free to drop a comment below. I will do my absolute best to answer those questions. If it's a good question, I may even make a video responding to that question on YouTube. So, you know, if it's good and there's enough meat on the bone, I think I've got enough context to answer a good question, then I will happily make a video. If you'd like us to help you set up Monday.com for your business, do stuff like this, automations, integrations, use of AI, check out the link below. We would love to help. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you soon in the next video. Goodbye.